The British Empire ruled over many countries. Even America, which is called a superpower today, was ruled by the British. Whichever country the British ruled, they used to impose many taxes on the people there. They also imposed taxes on Americans. Some taxes are the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts. Townshend Acts was very famous. This act placed an indirect tax on imported goods like glass, lead, paints, paper, and most famously tea, all of which had to be imported from Britain. The colonists were enraged by these taxes because they believed in no taxation without representation, arguing that the British Parliament had no right to tax them without having colonial representatives in Parliament. Due to colonial boycotts and protests, Parliament repealed most of the Townshend Acts in 1770, but they deliberately kept the tax on tea to maintain their right to tax the colonies. Americans began protesting against this Tea Act, which was imposed by Townshend Acts. What did the Americans do? They did only one thing. They stopped buying tea, which was imported from London from British East India Company, and started buying tea from Dutch, which was cheaper than the tea of East India Company. Approximately 86% of all the tea in America at the time was smuggled Dutch tea. As a result, British East India Company was facing a financial crisis, with a massive surplus of unsold tea in the company's English warehouse. To save the British East India Company, the British Parliament passed the Tea Act in 1773. This was not a new tax. This Tea Act actually lowered the price of tea for the American colonist. Understand these 2 points. First, before this Tea Act, the East India Company required to sell its tea at London Tea Auction. At this auction, merchants purchased the tea and then transported it to North America for eventual retail sale. Further, merchants will add their cost and his profit, which make price of tea high. Second point is East India Company paid a duty for this tea to the British government in Britain. In 1773, Tea Act get passed by the British government to save the company. This act allowed the British East India Company to sell its tea directly to the colonies, without paying the usual duties in Britain, cutting out the middleman and making the company's tea much cheaper than even Dutch tea. Let's understand why colonists protested a lower price. First reason is monopoly. Before this act, the colonial merchants purchased the tea from East India Company in London and then transported it to North America for sale. This Tea Act put colonial merchants and smugglers out of business. Now East India Company sells its tea directly to the colonies. Second reason for protest is tax. The main demand of the Americans is to remove the tax on tea. British government did not remove the tax. They taught if the price of the tea get decreased compared to smuggled Dutch tea, Americans would start buying its tea again, on which the Townshend tax was still collected. Mainly for this 2 reasons. Townshend tax was not removed, putting colonial merchants out of business. Americans started protesting against the Tea Act of 1773. The company was granted a license by the North Administration to ship tea to major American ports, including Charleston, Philadelphia, New York City, and Boston. With tea arrived at all these ports, but protesters did not allow the docking, forcing the tea back to England from Newark and Philadelphia. In Charleston, the colonists left the tea on the docks to rot. But in Boston case is different. Governor Hutchinson refused to allow the tea ships to leave the harbor until the Townshend tax had been paid and the tea unloaded. Colonial leaders demanded the tea be returned to England, but Hutchinson disagreed. On December 16, 1773, colonists disguised as Indians swarmed, boarded the 3 ships. They systematically smashed open 342 chests of tea and dumped the contents into the Boston harbor. This incident's known as the Boston Tea Party. The value of the destroyed tea was estimated at £10,000, well over $1.5 million in today's money. After that, British Parliament responded with a series of punitive laws in 1774, which the colonists quickly dubbed the Intolerable Acts, or Coercive Acts. Boston port closed until the colonists paid for the destroyed tea. Loss of self-governance, increasing the power of the royal governor. These harsh measures united many colonists even more in their frustrations against Britain and were one of the many causes of the American Revolutionary War.